Well, welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks for joining us. We turn our attention to the Ukraine, a quick, brutal strike wielding every weapon of war, from overwhelming military force to cyber attacks. Well, that's what the U.S. Secretary of State says Russia has in store for Ukraine.
While bracing for the worst, Ukrainians are responding boldly to Russia's rising aggression. Brody Carter begins our coverage on the latest warning about war in Europe.
As more Russian troops amass at Ukraine's border, threats of war have led to very real scenarios of what could happen if diplomacy fails. First, Russia uses a fake reason to launch an attack, sometimes called a false flag, and that leads to war in Ukraine.
We have reason to believe that they are engaged in a false flag operation to have an excuse to go in.
State Secretary Antony Blinken told the UN Security Council how a Russian invasion could begin.
Russian missiles and bombs will drop across Ukraine. Communications will be jammed. Cyber attacks will shut down key Ukrainian institutions.
Blinken added more specific details of how the attack would be carried out.
We have information that indicates Russia will target specific groups of Ukrainians. After that, Russian tanks and soldiers will advance on key targets that have already been identified.
Blinken said Russia could also use drone strikes and chemical warfare. And today, with tensions high, Russia announced massive drills of its nuclear forces. Thursday, NATO's Secretary General warned how dangerous a war could be.
We have seen also Iskander missiles in Belarus. And Iskander missiles are dual-capable missiles that can also carry nuclear warheads.
This is the exact kind of crisis that the United Nations, and specifically this Security Council, was created to prevent.
Russia argued that any attempts to place the blame on Russia are futile and blameless. Blinken said he was not at the UN to start a war, but to prevent one.
We are laying it out in great detail, with the hope that by sharing what we know with the world, we can influence Russia to abandon the path of war and choose a different path while there's still time.
In Ukraine itself, support for joining NATO, the very thing Vladimir Putin doesn't want, is now at an all-time high. For a look at the reaction from Ukrainians to the threat of an invasion, here's CBN's George Thomas from the city of Lviv in Ukraine.
Restaurant owner Herihori Raiba is frustrated that 31 years after Ukraine gained independence from Russia, it still lacks freedom of control.
Everyone else wants to decide our future for us, but I don't want Europe, the United States, NATO or Russia to decide our freedom. We are not a country of beggars.
With 150,000 Russian forces along the border, Raiba feels that his homeland is reduced to a pawn between great powers.
Ukraine is the playground for war between Russia and the West. Putin shows the world he can do whatever he wants to with Ukraine, and he does it. And then he taunts the world to see if they'll do anything in response.
A meme that's gone viral in Ukraine in recent days shows Russia's president threatening the West. Ukrainians speaking with CBN News say these are belligerent actions of a playground bully who uses coercion and threats of invasion to get what he wants.
He's a bully, like a hooligan, in the international arena. And I don't like how leaders of Western countries try to appease him. We need to confront him and stop negotiating with him.
Putin wants guarantees from the West, including a pledge to never allow Ukraine to join NATO. Germany's chancellor has floated the idea of giving into that as a way to avert war.
So they are now talking with our enemies behind our backs and not inviting us to these meetings that concern our future.
Many Russia watchers say the NATO membership question isn't the real issue because what Putin fears most is a country next door that's free, democratic, and wants closer ties with the West. Putin believes Russians and Ukrainians are one people, one language, and one country. Ukrainians disagree.
He cannot accept a liberal and free Ukraine. He cannot imagine a Russia without Ukraine. It's really so painful to see because of this one person, a lot of people are suffering. You need to remember he is mentally ill.
In survey after survey, when asked about the one thing that would make them feel positive about their country, the majority of Ukrainians said freedom. And today the polls show that so many Ukrainians want to not only join NATO, but also the European Union.
I think that's why Putin is angry, because we are a free people, we are a free country. And maybe this is the reason why he wants to invade our country and take away our freedom, so we can be like Russia.
With rumors of war swirling, people here repeatedly tell us this is a clear battle between freedom and tyranny. Ukrainians are prepared to sacrifice it all to remain free. George Thomas, CBN News, Lviv, Ukraine.
Well, this entire episode could backfire on Russia. I think they've miscalculated that their belligerence would result in Ukraine somehow backing down and saying, we would never leave you, Mother Russia. But the opposite has happened, and they're now saying we want to join NATO. We consider ourselves a European nation. They may even want to join the EU, which absolutely would be against Russia's interest, but that's what they're creating. And they're creating this anti-Russian sentiment throughout the nation. If they do invade, they're going to face a guerrilla war. The population is armed. So you'll see a continual battle, just as we've already seen on the eastern side of Ukraine since 2014. I think Putin has put himself into a corner, and what exactly will he do now? I predicted earlier that he would probably back off because the economic sanctions he would consider those and say, well, it's not worth our interest at this point in time to do that. But what he did instead was really ratchet it up. For him to back off now, he would lose face. So what's their end game? Well, I think the Duma has already signaled what their end game is. If we look at this, there's the vote that they took on Tuesday. And what they voted for, if we can see the map, is for two provinces on the eastern side of Ukraine, Luhansk and Donetsk. You can see those on the extreme eastern side. Those are largely Russian-identified people. They revolted back in 2014, and was that a pretext or not? And there was a peace agreement where they agreed to stay with Ukraine, but in 2014, they created People's Republics. There were two of them. Russia, at that point in time, didn't recognize them, but that shot of the deliberations at the Duma, they have urged Putin to sign a bill giving recognition to those two provinces as independent states. So the game here, if you will, and the face-saving is let's recognize them as independent states. Let's enforce that with our military. And let's create these buffer states, if you will, between Ukraine and Russia. And Putin can then say and claim victory. The problem for the West is that line has already been drawn, that no, you can't have these two provinces. That was made in an agreement back in 2015. The U.S., the Secretary of State, has already said we cannot ever let you recognize these as independent states. They are forever part of Ukraine. International law would come in, the UN would come in, and so we'll see continual turmoil. But that's been the reality on the ground since 2014 when Russia took Crimea. And so these are just extensions of a very long war. It's now 8 years, and so will this continue on? My prediction, yes, it will. In other news, the Beijing Olympic Games will wrap up on Sunday. TV ratings here in America have been very low, and international criticism of China's human rights record has been high. Still, the communist government considers the Games a great success, and Dale Hurd explains why.
While some labeled the 2022 Winter Olympics the Genocide Games, the event will be remembered as a propaganda victory, as China's government sought to portray one of the world's worst dictatorships as a normal nation. Still, there were moments, like when a news reporter from Dutch TV was suddenly strong-armed by a Chinese security guard in the middle of a live report. And when videos posted by a Finnish skier of water pouring out of the ceiling and electrical outlets in her Olympic Village apartment went viral, Chinese officials ordered her to delete the post.
The Olympics are supposed to be a celebration of the human spirit. That's not what this Winter Olympics was about. This Winter Olympics was about a propaganda exercise to make the regime look good in the eyes of the world.
The Beijing Olympics were controversial even before they began, and critics say they've shown the Chinese government for what it really is.
The world's greatest athletic showcase. But just outside the show, rape, genocide, slave labor.
NBC rejected this ad intended to run during the Olympics, ordering the names of the Olympic corporate sponsors blurred out.
We wanted to call out the American companies that are funding it all. It is just shameful and disgusting that American companies are turning a blind eye and funding this.
The spot also included NBA star Enes Kanter Freedom.
Stand for freedom, defund the dictators. When you see made in China,
put it down.
The Turkish Kanter Freedom, long a critic of both China and the NBA, had his name changed so that freedom would be displayed on his basketball jersey. But his NBA career could now be over, after the Boston Celtics traded him last week to the Houston Rockets, who then put him on waivers. Some claim the NBA caved to pressure from China. While there have been comparisons to the 1936 Olympic Games held in Nazi Germany, Stephen Mosier, author of the new expanded Bully of Asia, says these games are worse.
It's worse because we didn't know much about the concentration camps then. The persecution, the genocide of the Jews had not yet begun in earnest. But we know that there is genocide in real time against the 12 million Uyghurs in the far west of China. We know that the heads of household have been arrested and sent to concentration camps, not to mention that they, along with other dissidents, are being cut up and literally having their organs harvested and sold.
In 1936, the world not only went to Berlin, but offered the Nazi salute. This time, the U.S. and other nations chose to only declare so-called diplomatic boycotts of the Games. The world still showed up. The Games were held, and communist leaders were able to bask in their moment on the world stage. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
I don't know how much basking they're doing on the world stage, because you look at what they're doing and whether this is clamping down on democracy in Hong Kong, where the one state, two systems is now out the window, and it's either the mainland's way or the highway or jail. The number of provocations against Taiwan, the air raids that are on a continual basis trying to wear that island nation down. You look at these things and you just throw up your hands. What are you trying to prove? Well, they're trying to prove hegemony. They're trying to prove they absolutely will control all of Asia. That's what they want, and that's their goal. And they want to be the #1 superpower on the planet. And they want to control the world's economy. They want Shanghai to first overtake Tokyo, then overtake London and New York as an economic center. This is their express goal, and we should wake up and pay attention to it. I keep wondering, when will democracy break out? And it just seems like every time it does, the conservative side of the Communist Party raises up and says, no, not here. We want to assert control. We don't want democracy. We don't want freedom of speech. But as Christians, what do we do when we see these things? Well, we pray, and we understand that God can still move, and he can still make a difference. There was a time in Sun Yat-sen's day, this is 100 years ago, where a Christian who believed in democracy was trying to put a democratic government in China. He got overthrown by warlords, and it turned into this horrible decades, and then the Communist Party took over. The horrors of the 1950s, the horrors of the Tiananmen Square, all of these things. Let's continue to believe and let's continue to pray that the people in China can be free.